brief introductions on the SCF reports. And in the second session today, we'll be using an iterative format called the gallery walk. And this is be a first time for us as well as for you. So let's see how that works. And we'll have a gallery walk, which will allow you to explore the key reports through a visual display. There are 5 galleries set up in the room to facilitate this. And the SCF co-facilitators will be at each station to share insights, and other SCF members are welcome to join and to be there to answer any questions that you would have. So I wanted to add to my speaking notes that we're doing this because the Standing Committee on Finance is like the nerd finance for the convention, at least in terms of the finance sector. We have all of these finance negotiation going on at this time. And so we produce these really documents that are really, really rich in information that you would need to understand finance and what is happening and to help you to engage in the conversations that we have with negotiation using actual data. But of course, we know that we are not going to read all of this. So we're trying other ways to see if we can get you interested in seeing what is in the document so that you can actually have a look at it yourself. We think it will help you both here at the negotiation and when you go back home. So we encourage you to participate here and to get the information that we have. We spent a lot of time collecting this information, and much of the data come from your country and from your reports. So it would be good to see if it's reflected accurately and if it's consistent with what you are experiencing back home or in your region. So after the gallery walk, we're going to come back and sit down and have convened for the final Q&A session that you can ask. And so that's how we're going to run the show today. And so we're going to start with our first presentation, which is the BA, the Bienneial Assessment, which is the flagship for the Standing Committee on Finance. And we're going to pass to Vicky online if she's hearing me.
Yes.
Is hearing? Okay. Okay, Vicky, over to you.
Thank you, Diane, for this kind introduction. And yes, let's go straight into introducing the 6th BA. I will give the Secretariat some time. Okay, so the slides are already on the screen. Yeah, I can see them. Okay, so just, first, good morning or good afternoon for you, I assume. So on behalf of my co-facilitator, Diane, it is a great pleasure to present today the key findings of the 6th Bienneial Assessment and overview of climate finance flows, providing an update on the trends in climate flows up until 2022. As mentioned by Diane, we consider this to be one of our main flagships. Everybody should know this key graphic already. It has been a feature of every biennial assessment and is a so-called onion diagram, which is on the screen right now. It shows the overview of climate finance flows in the years 2021 till 2022, and it is a helpful way of framing the different flows globally and from developed to developing countries, but also public and private, as well as the major sectors. The blue shaded areas indicate global climate finance flows by sector, and the green shaded areas indicate flows from developed to developing countries with UNFCCC funds at the core. If we then go to the next slide to have a bit of more information about the global climate finance, there is one of the key findings is that global climate finance flows are increasing significantly. These were 60% higher in 2021-2022 than in average 2019-2020, and we're reaching up to $1.3 trillion per year on average. The graph on the screen shows how the increase was driven by mainly mitigation investments in sustainable transport, clean energy systems, and building and infrastructure. Then if we have a closer look at the flows from developed to developing countries, it's the next slide, or have you changed? Yeah, so adaptation finance to developing countries is predominantly delivered through grants, and particularly 78%. There you are. Okay, sorry. So first, when we have a look at the flows from developed to developing countries, an important item is that key finding is that adaptation finance to developing countries is predominantly delivered through grants. in particular 78% of multilateral climate funds and 66% of bilateral climate finance, while mitigation finance predominantly takes the form of loans. If we then reflect to the geographical and subpopulation size, the Asian and African regions receive the largest total amounts of public climate finance. And if we look into specifically the trends in support to least developed countries and small island developing states as a proportion of overall finance, varied across channels with 14 to 23% for LDCs and 3 to 4% for SIDS. Of course, you can find more information on total flows per channel on the poster, demonstrating growth of international public support flows across bilateral and multilateral channels. So that will be for the second part of the side event. I can hear somebody in the room. Well, okay. Anyway, so there is also the climate finance in context, which is also a very crucial aspect of our biennial assessment. So if we look at it from in the context of broader finance flows and opportunities and costs associated with the climate transition, it is clear that global climate finance flows are small relative to the overall needs for the climate transition. So a lot of work remains to be done. What you need to take away of this diagram is that it places in the context of $1.3 trillion of global climate finance flows, which was presented in the second slide, to other amounts such as the 4.2 trillion in annual flows needed for a net zero pathway. Every 4 years, the BA includes also a mapping of information relevant to Article 21C, including its reference to Article 9 thereof. As we all know, this is in the context of making finance flows consistent with a pathway towards low greenhouse gas emission and climate resilient development. And many public and private sectors efforts were identified in this sixth biennial assessment. The green and sustainable finance policies and regulations continue to grow, and there are now observed in over 100 jurisdictions. And also the private sector engagement is continuing. But still being concentrated in some world regions, geographical representation in private finance initiative is increasing, with institutions based in 52 different countries. Finally, on the Article 21C, a number of insights are emerging from the mapping of the information such as a trend from commitments and target setting towards transition implementation planning in the public and private financial sector, or similar to the first mapping in 2020, adaptation and climate resilience remain underexplored in many actions related to Article 21C, but attention to this area is rising in recent years for both public and private actors. I hope I didn't go too fast, but I do know there are a lot of good flagship reports that we have. So first of all, I want to thank you for your attention. And now I hand back to the moderator. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Vicky, for that presentation. So we're going to pass the floor to Kevin to discuss the second needs assessment that will be done. But Kevin, you missed the introduction phase. Could you please introduce yourself? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Diane. Happy to be here. Sorry for being a bit late. I've just learned that meeting room 7 and side event room 7 are not the same thing. So I wonder if that's where Mohammed is, who is my co-facilitator for this item. My name is Kevin Adams. I am the lead climate finance negotiator for the United States, here on behalf of the Biden administration, negotiating all matters climate finance, including the new goal, et cetera. So good to be here with all of you today. I'm going to talk a little bit today about the second report on the determination of needs of developing country parties. This is a pretty complex technical exercise that Mohammed and Ayoub and I from Saudi Arabia have been co-facilitating over the course of the last year. I'm very glad to have been a researcher in a past life because there is a lot of math in here and has been a little bit complicated. Back to my script. Thank you, co-chair. Great pleasure today to present a quick overview of some of the key findings on the second report on the determination of needs. More information on the key findings are available on the poster and, of course, on the SCF website. If we could skip to our second slide, the second NDR provides an updated overview of the needs of developing countries as of the 30th of June 2024. This is a comprehensive analysis which involves 754 of the latest national reports, including across 8 different report types. And you can actually see on the screen here. Thanks. You can see on the screen here each individual report type: national communications, NDCs, national adaptation plans, BURs, etc. Because these are different report types and sometimes needs are listed in more than one report, you can't just simply aggregate them together. You have to treat them as separate documents, which these have done here. It's also critical to note that information is reflected as reported by parties themselves. So we as the SCF have not taken and adjusted any of their information. We haven't done any methodological streamlining. All we've done is say, hey, what did Saudi Arabia or Mohammed here put in their national communication, and then reported that as they reported it in the document. In that regard, it's important to note that because of methodological challenges and potential omissions, the NDR does not determine the needs of developing countries, and it does not aggregate across report types. This key graphic shows the scale of needs expressed in each report type in dark green, the number of those needs that are costed in light green, and then at the very bottom, the costed amount for each of the graphs. So if a party said, I need support for climate smart agriculture, it's in the big green circle. If it says this is going to cost $50 billion, it's in the little green circle, and then all of those needs quantitatively are in the line underneath there. If we wanted to go on to the next slide, key findings. A key finding of the second NDR is that in NDCs, and the reason we've used NDCs here is because this is the most comprehensive set of documents. They cover multiple themes. Nearly every party submitted them. They work to roughly similar timeframes. So if you wanted one document to look at and say, this is probably the closest thing to the best overview, you want the NDC numbers. These are most representative. 98 parties reported needs amounting to a range of 5 to 6.9 trillion cumulatively. So this is the total amount over that period that parties reported. It's notable that costed needs, as stated by parties in the reports, are very heterogeneous. Notwithstanding the different methodologies that countries used for determining and costing their needs, their data are a mix of total and incremental costs, as well as investment needs, support needs. They are often broken down differently by international or domestic sources, conditional or unconditional, and sometimes that information isn't specified. So every country's done something a little bit different methodologically. They reported different things. It's all in here, but it's a pretty significant mix. The range of the costed needs, one of the questions we get a lot is why the range? Many parties reflect low to high range estimates in an activity or sector, and they include different estimates for why that would cost different amounts. These may be due to different temperature scenarios, different cost curves. So those reflect when countries themselves have reported different ranges, their lower and upper bounds. We've also included an annualized figure of US dollars 455 to 584 billion per year. This is also a little bit strange, the way that we've done this, because every report covers a different time frame. You take the time frame in the report, let's say Saudi Arabia, I'm going to keep using Mohammed as an example. They reported 10 years. You give whatever number they had, you divide it by 10, it goes into the annual mix. Some other country, Diane, Antigua, reports over 8 years. You take their total needs, divide it by 8, you put them together, you get an annualized number. It's not perfect. It's the best we have, the closest we could sort of get to getting that annualized figure out here. Again, conditionality and sources of finance are identified with a varying level of granularity, and you can sort of see in the Sankey diagram on the right here how and why those things are a little bit different. We could go on to the 4th slide, please. That would be great. Great. So geographic distribution of needs. So on the geographic distribution of needs, it's notable that the majority of the costed needs were reported by Asian countries, and you can take a look at this graphic in the bottom left here to get a sense of relative regional balance. The highest number of expressed needs were reported by African countries. Each individual box represents the needs of one country as reported in their NDC. It's notable as well that in some report types, a few parties reported a large majority of the needs. So if you look at Asia, there are a couple of very, very big boxes compared to some of the other regions. With regard to the thematic distribution of needs, which you can see on the right, these varied naturally across the different report types. So for national adaptation plans, for example, you can see there's many more adaptation needs. That makes a lot of sense. Or in technology-related reports, there's more focus on technology. It's a bit of a mix. A finding similar to the first NDR was that while adaptation needs make up a large share of the total expressed needs, they are often costed and expressed in lower quantitative amounts. So while we hear a lot about how many adaptation needs there are, and this is certainly true, their costs tend to come out lower than the mitigation needs, which tend to be a little bit more expensive. To move on to the last slide, I believe, on challenges, gaps, and opportunities. The report identifies a range of gaps, challenges, and opportunities in identifying the needs of developing country parties. I've already mentioned a couple of these. Some of the major ones are in data and information. For identifying needs and costing needs. So this includes the different methodologies, challenges, and issues of comparability across countries. So it would be useful in the future if we had a more aligned way of doing this work. There are also major institutional gaps and capacity and resource constraints for the needs determination process. Somebody in some government somewhere or a consultancy somewhere has to do this work, and you need the human capacity, technical expertise to do this needs assessment. There are, of course, many opportunities to enhance the needs identification process. Some that I might highlight are knowledge exchange and the dissemination of international best practice. I'm glad to have this knowledge exchange so you guys all know what the major gaps are and hopefully can help us fill some of those things. Enhancing comparability and balancing this with context-specific needs and priorities, as well as adopting whole-of-society approaches and strengthening national and international data collection and support systems to conduct these needs assessments. So this has just been a very quick overview of the report. Again, you can find further detailed information on the report during the gallery walk today, which I think we're going to hang out at and be able to stand by our reports and talk a little bit about, or online and in the technical summary of the second NDR. So with that, thanks for your attention. I'm happy to go back to Diane. Thanks.
Thank you, Kevin. So I think Apollonia and I have a little conversation about what we're going to do after the next few presentations. So I think the gallery walk will be a little bit difficult because for each year we come to COP to make a presentation. This is one of the biggest rooms we've ever had. So we didn't really expect a full room. We expected to have us joined by other nerds. So it's quite a few nerds at this COP, apparently. And so so what we're going to do is that while we're making a presentation, our co-facilitators will be on this front desk. So pay attention to who you need to ask the question, and we'll go right into the question and answer. But you can walk around and take a photo of the slides that you want to get, or the summaries are printed at the back. And we can also make the PowerPoint presentation available to you as well. So so all of the co-facilitators will stay up here and you can ask them the question directly rather than having to them go and stand next to their presentation. Right, I think that'll be a little bit more efficient based on the fact that the room is quite full. So next, we're going to present the $100 billion report. Everybody understand that report. There's a lot of controversy here. Our climate finance negotiators, we fight over this a lot between developed and developing country. And so we decided to actually write it down to see and count how much it actually is. And that very important job is going to be is being done by Gabby and Richard. Richard is not here, so Gabby is online and she's going to present our findings. Gabby, over to you.
Thank you very much, Diane. I hope you can hear me. Can you give me a thumbs up if you can hear me in the room?
Yes, we can hear you. We can hear you.
Great.
Go ahead.
Perfect. Yes, my name is Gabriella Blatter. I am the lead negotiator for Switzerland and finance coordinator for EIG since many years, but this time not at COP, but I hope you guys will come to a successful outcome nevertheless. Thank you very much, distinguished delegates, dear ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of my co-facilitator, Richard Miyongi, it is a great pleasure to provide a brief overview of some of the key findings of the second report on progress towards achieving the goal of mobilizing jointly 100 billion per year to address the needs of developing countries in the context of meaningful mitigation actions and transparency of implementation. More information on the findings, as well as the approach and the methodological challenges in producing the report, are found on the poster and, of course, in the executive summary and the report itself. Similar to the first report, this work was undertaken by the SEF for consideration by the COP, and the second report was developed in response to the mandate from COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh. Can you switch the slide, please? Going into the key findings, this report assesses progress using various information sources and accounting methods, acknowledging diverse sources, channels, and financial instruments that lead to different conclusions. The graph shown here is found in the report and shows data reported by the OECD in the top part of the graph, according to which climate finance provided and mobilized reached $115.9 billion in 2022. The bottom left blue graph shows the estimates collected by the SEF from parties, which don't include the outflows of multilateral organizations and therefore amount to only $67.1 billion in 2022. And the bottom right green graph shows the assessment by Oxfam, estimating that climate finance provided in grants and grant equivalent terms amounts to a range of 28 to 35 billion in 2022. All the sources of information conclude that there is a substantial growth in the climate finance flows to developing countries since 2020, and both mitigation and adaptation finance, as well as grants and loans, increased substantially. The SEF found that one source of information indicates the goal was met in 2022 and suggests that measures taken to increase public finance and the mobilization of private finance have been more effective than in previous periods. Next slide, please. With regards to the dimensions of how the goal is addressing the needs of developing countries, the report used a proportional comparison of finance flows to the needs reported in SEF's second needs determination report that was just published this year and presented by Kevin just before. This comparison was considered useful by the SEF to assess what areas of the finance is targeting, despite, of course, the recognition that the needs expressed by developing countries outweigh the volume of the US 100 billion goal by far. Adaptation finance, in the dark blue in the visual, found in the report, represented 24 to 44% of the finance in 2020 to 2022, sorry. The ranges here are dictated by whether the face value of the instruments are counted or the grant equivalent values, as the propensity of the grants in adaptation finance leads to a higher share overall. Compared to the needs, adaptation is 14 to 48% of the share of the expressed needs and 16 to 58% of the costed needs, depending on which report you're taking as underlying source. And Kevin was also elaborating on that quite extensively before. On the next slide, you see on the dimensions of the context of meaningful mitigation action and transparency on implementation, a key challenge is to establish a causal link between the mitigation action and transparency on implementation and the finance flows measured and tracked. So that we've been repetitively asked to do that, but it's really, really hard to do that. Yet observed trends related to mitigation actions include, for example, the rate of emissions growth slowed from 2.2% per year to 1.5%, and almost all developed country parties have submitted an updated NDC, as well as almost all developing countries have submitted an NDC, and more than 2/3 have submitted an updated NDC as of July 2024. The aggregate effect of mitigation actions and submitted NDCs are projected to reduce global greenhouse gas emissions by 4.6 to 5.8% by 2025 and by 11.4 to 12% by 2030 compared to 2016 levels, nearing 2010 levels. Although it should be noted that the IPCC estimates emissions need to fall by 43% from 2019 levels to be consistent with a 1.5-degree pathway, so we're still quite far off. Many sources of information point to the importance of transparency on implementation with regard to action and support to enhance mutual trust and accountability. And in the lower part, you also on the slide, you see some highlights on transparency, which include, for example, that almost all Annex 1 parties have submitted 5th biennial reports by the 31st of July 2024, with information on climate actions as well, support provided. 96% of non-Annex 1 parties have submitted a second national communication, and 66%, a third, including information on climate actions and needs. 68% have submitted a biennial update report, which also includes information on support received. So we do see some positive trends across all areas. Many thanks for your attention, and I'm happy to hand back to the moderator.
Okay, thank you, Gabby, so much for that presentation. So once again, so we won't be doing the gallery walk because Gabby's co-facilitator is not here, so we would support Gabby from here. And we're so sorry that she's not here at COP this year. So I would also now turn to the common practices reports, and I'd like to pass to Karima. Karima, sorry.
Thank you, Diane. Thank you, co-chairs. And thank you all for being here. I'm happy on behalf of myself and my co-facilitator, Diego Pari Rodriguez from Bolivia, who unfortunately is not here at the COP, to present the report on common practices regarding climate finance definitions, reporting, and accounting methods. Maybe you can go already in the next slide, so to be mindful of time. So basically, this work is, of course, based on previous work of the SCF. This is a long-standing mandate, so to say, given to SCF related to the definition of climate finance. And this work has been also thought building on the report of last year on clustering the types of climate finance definitions in use. Again, in Dubai, the SCF has been tasked to report in more detail on common practices in use by parties and other climate finance providers and reporting organizations in order to cluster and present in a more organic way the definitions, reporting, and accounting methods. So there has been an effort to separate out the three streams in a way where, of course, we were mindful of the fact that the line between one and the other can be blurry sometimes. So the report starts with the context of these common practices and finds that among parties there are a multitude of approaches and frameworks for reporting on climate finance, including under the Convention and the Paris Agreement, reflecting the bottom-up approach of each and every party to define, report, and account climate finance. Specifically, of course, the BTRs and the upcoming reports has been not taken into account in this analysis because, of course, they are upcoming. But, of course, we expect that, again, more detailed information will be available through the BTRs on the approaches that parties and other organizations will take with respect to climate finance, provide and mobilize, and also needed and received. With respect to other climate finance providers and reporting organizations, track and report climate finance for different purposes and have developed or are developing their reporting systems to better fulfill those purposes. So we have in front of us a range of approaches which differs between and among parties, but also across parties and other reporting organizations and aggregators of data. Next slide. Thank you. So with regard to common practices on climate finance definitions, so the first stream, the analysis focused on the 5th BRs, biennial reports. So the information there was screened and taken into account in the analysis. And the main finding is that many Annex 2 and Annex 1 parties, not including Annex 2, provided detailed guidance on what they consider as climate finance, in particular through lists of examples and activities. And in addition, almost all parties made reference to mitigation and adaptation, while some other parties referenced other themes of support, such as capacity building, technology transfer, loss and damage, just transition response measures. Among non-Annex 1 parties, high-level centers has a descriptions of what they consider as climate finance was a common practice approach. Of course, you can again look at the galleries and at the pictures that you have there, where you have the snapshots and the findings, also including other climate finance providers. Maybe we can go to the next slides, which focuses on accounting methods. So with regards to accounting methods, many parameters exist, and again, here many approaches exist. But the report tried to find commonalities among these different approaches, especially among parties. We identified the common use of the RIO markers, the OECD RIO markers, and the use of climate-specific shares, the reporting on disbursements, and information on new and additional finance. While among other providers, it was very common the use of common outcome metrics and indicators. We can go to the next slides, which focuses on reporting of climate finance. Again, among parties, we analyzed and we found a trend towards more granular and complete reporting under the convention, and this is again expected to improve in the future under the ETF from 2024 onwards. While among other climate finance providers, a variety of reporting practices exist and aggregating also exercises exist, which reflects the diversity of objectives and purposes that those institutions do have with respect to the climate finance. Of course, these different relate to geography, sectors, financial instruments, information, but also on how progress towards the objectives are actually aggregated and taken into account. So, for example, we've just seen with the 100 billion report, the OECD and Oxfam reporting practice and tracking approaches are, of course, different with respect to the, again, the criteria that you use and the methodology that you approach. So I think also in mindful of time, I can really thank my co-facilitator again, Diego Pareiro Rodriguez, the Secretariat, and their support in their precious support in this work. Of course, this is just a few words on all the findings and all the content that are in the report. So I, of course, invite you to read the report and also to read back the reports that the SCF has been working on in the past. So you can see the wealth of information that has been put together in order to inform also our knowledge of what is climate finance, what definitions and which approaches are being used by parties. So thank you very much for your attention, and hand back to the co-chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Karima. If I'm not mistaken, so the Standing Committee on Finance is very efficient in how we do our work. We are conscious of money and we want to make sure we spend it well. So one of the ways we work both virtually and in person. And I think this is the first time I'm actually seeing Karima in person. So it just occurred to me that I'm online and she's in person, and then she's online and I'm in person. So it's great to have, we wanted to see that we are making sure that we can get all of this work done in an efficient and low-cost manner. And so another flagship of the Standing Committee on Finance that we really do enjoy is our forum. And this year we had it in Tanzania. Richard is not in the room, but we had really warm welcome, all of us in Tanzania, to the country. It was really lovely to be there, and it was our first forum on gender, and it was well attended, and for sure we all learned a lot. And I just want to say before I hand over to Brittany is that, further to what Karima is saying, is that those of you from developing country like mine, then a lot of the documents and the outputs and so on is really important for you to look at, and you can basically cut and paste when you're designing your project to submit to the draft, the GCF, or the adaptation fund. So that information, like the climate information, social information, and then gender information that you're going to get from here should be able to help you to prepare your funding proposals to submit. So with that, we had Alina and Brittany. I'm not sure who's going to take the floor, but could you please present? Thanks.
Thank you, Diane, for the introduction. So my co-facilitator and I are going to both talk about the forum. So this year's forum was focused on gender responsive finance for climate action and resilience. So the SCF organizes its forum annually with one objective in mind, and that is to promote linkages and coherence among climate finance actors. So in organizing the forums, the SCF aims to serve as a bridge between the practitioners and the decision makers at the COP. So since the committee's establishment, it's convened 10 forums so far. And this year's forum was held in Arusha, Tanzania on the 2nd and 3rd of September. We found it was a very successful forum, drawing more than 130 climate finance actors from governments, financial institutions, private sector, academia, and think tanks. Over the 2 days, participants exchanged best practices and lessons learned in mobilizing and accessing gender responsive financing for climate action and resilience. So moving to the next slide, I think the forum covered several topics this year, and it was structured around 3 main pillars. So topics that were covered in plenary sessions. Each of these topics and pillars allowed for more in-depth discussions on a range of issues related to advancing gender responsive financing in climate action and resilience. These pillars provided a comprehensive framework for exploring both strategic approaches and practical experiences with gender responsive financing. The first pillar was integrating gender into NDCs and NAPs. In this discussion, participants focus on strategies for embedding gender into NDCs and NAPs, and the overall discussions explored how gender responsive financing can translate these plans into impactful actions, therefore helping countries achieve both climate and gender equality goals. The second pillar was on sources and instruments of gender responsive finance. Now, these discussions examined a range of financing sources and tools available for gender responsive climate action and resilience. It also covered international and domestic funding sources, private sector engagement, innovative financing mechanisms such as gender bonds and blended finance to drive greater investment in gender and climate goals. And then we had the third and the last pillar, which was mobilizing and accessing gender responsive financing throughout a climate project lifecycle. Those discussions brought together practitioners to share experiences in mobilizing and using gender responsive financing across different stages of climate projects. The discussions on this pillar focused on practical insights, challenges, and best practices for integrating gender considerations from project planning to implementation and monitoring. And I'll pass it over to Britt on what the takeaways were.
Thank you, Elena. And I'd like to start by thanking everyone for coming. And there are many of you in the room here who were in Tanzania at the forum. So it's great to see you again. We don't do negotiated outcomes from the forum. So what we've done in the report is summarize some of the key takeaways based on our understanding as the Standing Committee of Finance as to how conversations coalesced. So we're just going to walk you through some of those, but they're also contained substantively in the report, and we encourage you to read that report as well, which is available on the SCF website. So I think first and foremost under the first topic heading is the forum highlighted the importance fundamentally of gender inclusivity as central to climate action. And in that regard, it emphasized the role of gender in achieving climate resilience, the Paris Agreement goals, and sustainable development. It also highlighted that gender responsiveness finance is fundamental to climate action at every stage. And there was very strong sort of agreement around that element, which was heartening. In addition to that, it noted the importance of integration of gender in climate finance across all stages. And in just picking up on two particular points that were raised, that financial institutions should ensure gender integration in decision-making and project funding criteria. And there was also a broad discussion around the importance of prioritizing both quality and quantity of financing, ensuring alignment with needs and priorities of developing countries and vulnerable communities. There was a significant focus at the forum on data and transparency, and that was raised across many of the pillars that Elena walked us through. And just to pick up two key points from those discussions, the parties and delegates spoke quite commonly about the importance of financial institutions needing to improve gender disaggregated data collection and reporting practices. And there was also like a strong coalescence around the importance of enhancing data collection methods and transparency, accountability, and comparability across projects and regions. Because from a data collection standpoint and representation standpoint, there are significant challenges there. Enhancing access was another key focus and takeaway from the forum. And there was an important focus on financial institutions further simplifying application processes for funding to support women-led organizations and local communities, as well as financial institutions establishing direct funding channels and tailored financial products for grassroots initiatives. There was a strong focus on capacity building and learning throughout the entire thread of the forum. And in that regard, there was support for capacity building programs for national governments, civil society, and grassroots organizations, and improving access to finance as well for capacity building. And in addition to that, there was a strong focus on integration of gender responsiveness and gender responsive criteria through all stages of the project design, implementation, and evaluation lifecycle. There was a strong focus throughout the forum on the particular role of national governments and the private sector, and there was a focus on the need to partner with governments to create enabling environments that incentivize private sector investments in gender responsive projects, as well as an importance of collaborating with finance, environment, and other relevant ministries to align investments with national climate and gender policies, the integration across the policy cycle as well. There was a really strong focus on the forum throughout all themes on the importance of inclusion and grassroots voices. In particular, examples were raised on establishing mechanisms for empowerment and active decision-making of women, youth, and Indigenous communities across decision-making processes. And there was also a strong focus across the board on implying inclusive approaches to financing, including considering gender alongside other social factors and taking into account intersectionality. The forum finally had a really strong focus on the importance of embedding gender responsiveness across the UNFCCC and beyond. So there was calls from many members for integration of gender responsiveness across the UNFCCC work streams and items as appropriate, as well as highlighting of opportunities to do that, in particular, looking at the global stocktake and at COP29 processes like the NCQG. So these are just some teasers from some of the key findings of the forum report. We encourage you to read them, and it is available on the SEF website. I'll stop here and just sort of close by noting we think this was the best forum that's ever had, but I'm sure that the co-facilitators say that every year. Elena and I had a lot of fun facilitating it, and we'd like to thank everyone who participated because it was a really constructive event. Thanks. Back to you, Diane.
Thank you so much. Our co-facilitators were both here sitting up front. So our very first forum we had was in the margins of the carbon market. We were criticized for it, but I mean, it was a great kickoff. That was very popular as well. We have had in the margin of the SIF, which was in Jamaica, the adaptation, and then we had many others, and this was indeed really, really good that we have come to this point where we can like dig into how we operationalize this thing that we're doing about climate change to make sure that gender is important, not only mitigation, adaptation, and so on, but gender is important. So just as a reminder, this is where we would have break and you would have wandered around the room, but it's we said that maybe this is not the most appropriate, but all the posters and the slides that you're interested in, they are on the website. So you can go and search the website, the SCF website at this point. I mean, we have some printouts, small printouts, and I don't like those and carrying in your suitcase these days, but they're not that much. and a lot of it is online. So you can go online. Your homework for the next 2 seconds is to go online and do your research, and then we're going to open the Q&A, so we can go a little bit longer for question and answering. So so thank you for that, and I'm going to hand back over to my co-chair.
Thank you, Diane. Before opening the Q&A session, I will give again the floor to Brit. I'm sorry, Brit, to call you. Maybe you want to introduce the Pink Day of tomorrow, and then we can go back.
I'm very happy to. So those of you who are following along with the action agenda, which I'm sure you are if you're here, you'll know that tomorrow is Finance Day on the Presidency's sort of program of events. And we've become accustomed now in the finance room to turning Finance Day as well into Pink Day. So we did this at COP last year. We did it at the ESPYs as well. So we will be encouraging you all to wear pink tomorrow for Finance Day. That's for several reasons. First and foremost, we do it to mark the importance of gender responsive climate financing and to stand as individuals in this process as champions for that, as well as to note the important role that women and girls play in advancing climate action, as well as in our treasured process that we all participate in here. So if you have something pink, we encourage you to wear it tomorrow. We'll try and get a group photo at some point outside one of the finance rooms. Thanks.
Thank you, Brit. Of course, this call is for men and women, not only for women. And I would like also to invite Clara to stand up because Clara is one of the SCF members. You want to introduce yourself? Just 1 second.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Clara Schultz. I'm from the Swedish Ministry of Finance and recently joined the SCF. Very happy to be here.
Thank you, Clara. And then finally, the Q&A session. Please, if there are, yes. Before giving the floor, I would like to invite you. I will give the floor, but please introduce yourself, your name and affiliation. So the first time to this man.
Hello, I'm Vishnu Mohan. I represent the Times of India newspaper. My question is about one of the highlights in one of the reports in the summary, executive summary. It says the annual mitigation requirement needs something around 1.1 trillion to 2.4 trillion by 2030. And if you look at the 2035 goal, it would be 2.9 trillion per year. Though it would be anyone's guess what would be the landing zone during the NCQZ text. But how do you arrive at this figure and how realistic it could be?
If you don't mind, I will collect the other 2 questions. I see one and then B, and then, okay, please.
Yes, hello, Alejandro de Kaiser, ICC. In your opinion, what's the major challenge the NCQG is facing at this COP?
Thank you. Forgive my voice. My name is Richard Mugenyi from Uganda, from Reproductive Health Uganda. Thank you for the report and the presentations. I was just wondering on when we are talking about the developing country parties, when they are reporting, we've seen that there is progress made when it comes to domestic financing for climate change. But I know one of there's a big temptation for the developing countries to make commitments, allocate finances to climate change. But when it comes to releases, it is it's hard. And even when it releases expenditure, it's again a tug of war. So I don't know when we are tracking financing, especially domestic financing, which we want to encourage, whether we track commitments, allocations in our budgets, and also releases and expenditure. It will be interesting. And thank you again. It's interesting to listen and hear that there's progress made when it comes to gender financing, gender responsive financing, and it's happening a lot. And again, I would have loved to see a recommendation in the reports on increasing gender responsive financing, especially using domestic finances. And of course, yeah, it's one of the things that we miss out, yet gender is critical when it comes to adaptation, climate change resilience and adaptation. And we miss out to see that that recommendation, but also when the developing country parties, when they're reporting again, it would be good to see what is allocated on gender, because in a number of our countries, again, allocations can be made on gender, but it remains on paper. Releases and expenditure, nothing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. There is one more question, and then we can pass for the first round of answer. Please, this lady.
Thank you, Fiona Ryan from Forest Development and Climate in Australia. I didn't hear any mention, maybe I was slipping through something, but I didn't hear any mention of new and additional, which goes back to the original Climate Change Convention. I mean, there's original, I think, independent aid report by a UK government, by the UK government on aid impact. It said there was a lot of UK aid projects were reclassified as climate projects retrospectively to include in their finance commitments, and I didn't hear that mentioned in any of the presentations. And yeah, it's most climate finance is classified as foreign aid, and it's very easy just to click the Rio marker. I don't think there's anybody checking. So yeah, I just thought I'd focus on that issue. Thanks.
Thank you. I think that for the first question, I will give the floor to Kevin, but also I will invite Karima and other co-facilitator to intervene. But first of all, to Kevin.
Yeah, thanks, Apollonia. So many good questions. So to start off with maybe the first one on how did we get the numbers for the NDR? The numbers are as they are presented by countries in their national reports. So if a country says it's going to cost us X billion dollars, we take that number and we copy it and we paste it into our Excel spreadsheet. That's it. It's as easy as that. I think a lot of what is on people's mind this year, of course, is the new goal and how one would reasonably set a quantum for that. And one key document that people have in mind is looking at the NDR as a place to maybe draw some parallels. And I think for me, one of the things that working on the NDR has revealed is how challenging it is to draw that straight line, because everybody has different methods, everybody has different time frames, all of those numbers are different, there are lots of them that are missing, and haven't been vetted in any way, right? They're just whatever any country reported on what they should do, which is really helpful and useful information, but there hasn't been sort of a party discussion on like, well, are these numbers real? Are you using the right method? How much are we going to pay for with support? So it is just sort of a copy paste, but I would caution people against drawing that kind of straight line over. To maybe talk quickly on the major issue in the ENCQG, just because I know nobody up here wants to answer that question, is I would say all of them. Everything is still open. We are still having a lot of discussions about all of the pieces of the text. There was a new compilation released this morning that I think we're all reviewing with a lot of interest. Lots to still be discussed. I think for us, the vast majority of this is still on the table, and we're looking forward to seeing a robust outcome and happy to talk through any individual piece at some later time, but lots going on. Role of domestic finance, I'll leave to somebody else. Gender quickly in the context of the NDR, I would say here, one of the things I would note, and I believe there is a small section on gender responsive financing in the NDR, the challenge is tracking and information and how countries have reported needs on those things. So unless a country in a national report says, hello, I need this for gender specifically, it's difficult for us to get that information. We're sort of limited by what countries themselves have reported. And in many cases, gender is mainstreamed through these other activities. There's a mitigation activity that has gender components or that has been designed in a way that is gender responsive, which may come in the mitigation numbers, but might not be labeled as a gender responsive project, for example. So there's some challenges there. And I might just touch new and additional also very quickly, because I guarantee you somebody is checking that information. I am one of those people for the US government who checks all of our climate finance reporting. We go through, we do an interagency data call for every climate finance activity we report. A lot of it is forward assistance, but the reason for that is because much of our forward assistance has integrated climate change into that programming. Some of it has always been dedicated and exclusively for climate. Some of it is for biodiversity or for conservation, for health. But we've gone back and said, well, how do we take climate into account in this context? And that is a climate investment, that is climate support. And in our view, that can and should count. But we are looking at this, certainly, we promise. I'll stop there and happy to hand it down to Karima for any questions relevant to her.
Please, Karima, if you don't mind, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the very good questions. Maybe let's come first on the new and additional, which is of course a very important point, and I can again ensure that the new and additional component of the reporting as information is also checked by all the expert review teams that are checking the reporting under the convention and now under the Paris Agreement. It's part of the guidance of the biennial reports, and so I mean also myself as a lead reviewer, I was checking some parties' information on new and additional. Of course, the definition of what new and additional is again bottom up, as all the rest of the approaches and the methodologies. But usually, I mean, parties are providing this information, so the reports usually contain this information on that, and in the report we try to look at that as well. So we, I mean, you can find in the report some information related to the new and additional climate finance. Maybe on the domestic climate finance, if I understood the question correctly, and apologies if I didn't. So in the report, there is one example of domestic taxonomy, which we wanted to add just to show the fact that the definition and the approaches, the methodological approaches to climate finance are different also if we speak about the international level and the domestic level. So we have different approaches, different definitional accounting and reporting approaches and methodologies also for the domestic part. So the example that we have in the report is the EU taxonomy on sustainable finance, but it's just one of many examples that state and non-state actors are using at domestic level, so including green budgeting, tagging, and so on. Of course, the domain of the of climate finance that we are talking about here, as you know, is just at international level. So there's no way of there's no reporting modality. There's no basically space in this for climate finance at domestic level to be reported in this space. Of course, in a way, I mean, from a very I would say technical point of view, it would be very interesting to have more information on that. So I totally agree with who posed the question, and we'll see. Maybe the NCQG can give a good space to start reporting information on that. So we can also look at that dimension, which could be actually very interesting. That's what's happening also in the biodiversity space, which I mean the resource mobilization part in that space is also concerns domestic finance. So we'll see if developments are going to be interesting in that sense. Thanks.
Please, Diane, and then I think Brit, in case.
Yeah, I think from a small and developing state, so the most important figure in finance for us is how much money you're not spending on fossil fuel. And we have to make that very clear. So if you're increasing money on green technology, but your corresponding money for fossil fuel is going up, you kind of have a wonder what is that for us is the greatest indicator of what is happening on the ground. We're also concerned about money that is spent on subsidies and where you're going to be switching those subsidies in both sides, because when you subsidize green technology, it actually drives up the price for many developing countries because technology comes from developed countries, and when you provide subsidies in many developed countries, it drives up the price. And so it's very difficult for us to access that technology because we don't provide subsidies for that technology. So everybody only wants to sell their EV cars or their solar in that country where they get the most bang for their buck. So I think that is the most important issue for us with respect to gender responsive financing. The data there's no data, and the countries don't track money from gender responsive. And one of the issue with gender responsive in my country, many of our countries, when you hear gender responsive, the first paragraph says gender responsive and you define gender. So if you have a paper, a 6-page paper on gender responsive, the first paragraph says gender and every other paragraph and pages talk about women and girls. So we really don't have we have a good idea of money spent on women and girls. We can calculate that, but that is not gender responsive financing in its entirety. So I think we need to define what that is and then provide a tracking tool for something like that, if that is what we want to do. But I don't think we're quite ready to do that. But I remember when Vicky's online, when we did the first BA, a lot of the data that we didn't have then, we have it now in this BA. So that is something, as Kareem have said, that we can actually include as we are tracking other things. But we have to be open to the idea of tracking men and boys as well as women and girls. Thanks.
Thanks. I might just come in a little bit to talk about the difficulties we do have with tracking gender responsiveness. I think fundamentally, we don't track gender responsiveness in climate finance. We don't do it very well, certainly. We don't have an obligation to report gender responsiveness, and there are challenges to doing so, which also can place reporting burdens back on recipients in developing countries in an unhelpful way. So it's not a simple answer. It's not necessarily please do more of this. It's how can you scale up reporting and data collection on this in a manner which makes sense and which doesn't increase reporting burden for developing countries. But there also was a fundamental question we talked about at the start of the forum is what is gender responsive financing? It's not the same to tick a box and say, yes, we've thought about this in the context of women and girls, or 1 to 2 women are benefited by this project. It needs to be far more inclusive and deliberate and intentional. And that too does place a burden on those who are implementing the projects. And so this was a thread we carried throughout the conversation of the forum, that it's nuanced and it's hard, and there's a lot more we can do collectively to enhance how we think about this. But certainly there was a really strong call from everyone on the importance of data for improving policy outcomes. And so we would like to see more data on gender responsive financing, but it's not a simple answer on how you get it, I think is the main thing. The Biennial Assessment is probably the best we have of capturing how climate and gender responsive financing comes together, and it shows that we don't have a lot of that data currently. And Diane makes a good point. We don't want to be binary with how we think about what is gender responsive financing. We need to be thinking about it holistically as well. But there are mechanisms out there for this, and there are other forums and sort of data collection points that do this maybe better than we do in our climate financing profile. One thing to note is that a lot of countries are tracking gender responsiveness in their climate financing budgets and sort of allocations, and there are some countries who do this really well, particularly some across Europe. So there are cases for us to learn from there as well, and it's certainly not a lost cause, but much further we can go.
So I think that we can open the floor, and with regard to the EU challenges on NCQG are in common road. So yeah, 1 second. So these 2 ladies, and then
At the back.
yeah, on the back. No, yeah. The lady on the back, they already, yeah. Okay, you have already the microphone. Please introduce yourself and then we can.
Sure. My name is Fiona Bear. I'm here with Princeton University. So thank you all for your really interesting presentations. I have a question that's probably mainly for you, Kevin, just to better understand what opportunities exist to actually streamline the methodologies for country reporting of both needs and costing. I guess, for example, I'm curious, like in the discussion of updated NDCs, is there any attempt to kind of streamline reporting plans? And if so, or if not, right, like what are the challenges to streamlining country reporting so that we have a better understanding of needs assessments? Thank you.
So now to the 2 ladies on the back. Yes.
Thank you. This Debbie Hillier from Mercy Corps, and just thank you for the presentations. They were excellent. I wanted to ask a question about grant equivalence. So the biggest difference between the OECD calculation of the 100 billion and the Oxfam one is around the use of, not the use of grant equivalence. I note that grant equivalence has an OECD agreed methodology. It's used in ODA accounting. So 2 questions. Why is it not just automatically used in climate finance accounting? And because it's caused quite a lot of issues in terms of whether the 100 billion goal has been achieved or not, will the SCF recommend that grant equivalence is used in the NCQG? Thank you.
Thanks so much. Marwa from Tunisia, and I work for the UK FCDO, and I lead on developing programs in North Africa. My question is an observation, and I would like to get your opinion on this. Would you believe that we need a new middle ground between those who provide climate finance and those who need it in order to be able to unblock the available climate finance to fund projects in countries which need funding? By a new middle ground, I mean countries providing donors to ask for to lower their requirements, and countries which need funding to show better commitment to make projects successful. So this is my question. And another observation, which I would personal observation that I would like to share with you, is that I really believe that a lot of climate finance available is being spent on studies, reports, events, while we do really need to see concrete projects. The pace of the climate change is really going fast, and one day it's going to be very late for us to spend the available climate funding in countries which need it. So this is an observation, and I wanted to share it with you because I know how influential you are. We definitely need more pilot projects, more concrete infrastructure projects, which can tackle mitigation and adaptation. We are funding a lot of reports and studies, and then countries are not able to execute these suggestions and studies and reports, and then they become outdated, and then we have to fund again, studies again. So please take this into consideration. Thank you.
Thank you for this question and also observation. I saw, and here we can take only other two, also because it's already 2:30. So the man and then the lady.
Thank you very much. I think it's been a very good job done because it's really hard to get.
Could you please introduce yourself?
My name is Subarna Barua. I'm a professor of finance at the University of Dhaka, Bangladesh. I'm coming from Bangladesh. But I had one of the concerns that has been already raised on the OECD, the quality of the data is really concerning because there has been recent reports where the developed countries are claiming that they have already delivered the $100 billion pledge, referring to the OECD data. And then the SCF is producing this report today, let's say, saying that it's relying more on the OECD climate finance relevant data. So my question is, do you think that this might create a kind of confusion in the market about what information message actually the SCF report is delivering, that whether the $100 billion pledge has already been delivered, and on the back of the concern that the OECD climate relevant data could be inflated. There are reports saying that it could be inflated, whether we can really rely that data to report to produce this kind of reports. It's just my curiosity to know your opinion. And the second part is on the so far the summary, executive summary I have gone through. It doesn't show the distribution of the global climate finance flow between domestic and international sources, because if we cannot really, because the CPI says that's almost 84% are domestic. So if the global climate finance flow is not segregated from that perspective, we are not sure how much really money is flowing from international sources to the countries. So yeah, I mean, if you have any further information on that sort of distribution, it'd be great to know. But thanks very much. I know because I work on the same domain, so it's very hard to crunch the data and calculate things. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. So Zoe Reyes from Institute for Policy Studies. So my question is, if you have any kind of concrete examples of how you would embed the recommendations and lessons from the Forum on Gender Responsive Financing elsewhere in the UNFCCC process. And then in particular, I was wondering if there's any particular channel or means for having those considered by operating mechanisms of the convention, so the GCF, the GEF, and so on. Thanks.
Thank you so much. If Gabi is still online, I will start with Gabi, was co-facilitator for 100 billion report, and then also to Vicky, if Vicky is still online. So Gabi, please, over to you.
Thank you. Apo, can you hear me?
Not so well. It's really low. Now it's better.
Okay, great. I hope you'll be able to hear me anyway. I'm not sure if I cast all the questions, but there was one on the grant equivalence and why it's not being used in the accounting towards the 100 billion in all sources of information. Yes, Oxfam does the grant equivalent calculation. The problem with grant equivalent methodologies is that it only exists for grants and loans. There is no grant equivalent methodology which is accepted by all parties or a group of parties for any of the other financial instruments. And the 100 billion goal language clearly states from a variety of sources and instruments. So if we would go with the grant equivalent accounting methodology, we would exclude specific instruments, financial instruments, and it also would make it very challenging to account for the private finance because private finance per se is not provided in grants. And that's primarily why there's a divergence of methodologies and not all sources of information use grant equivalents. And does the SEF going to make, and will the SEF make a recommendation to use the grant equivalent methodology for the NCQG accounting? The SEF has not had any deliberations on that. It's also not up to the SEF to do that. It's up to parties to first decide on an NCQG, and depending on the formulation of the NCQG and whether parties will give the SEF a role in tracking progress towards the NCQG, and under which circumstances, then the SEF will have to take on that mandate. But we don't have a mandate to give recommendations on whether or not there should be any accounting methodologies towards the NCQG. That's why we, as a committee, didn't take a stand on that. And I think there was one question on whether there's some market distortion because there is no clear statement by the SEF whether the 100 billion have been achieved or not. I'm not sure which market you were referring to, but I guess we would be quite proud as SEF if our reports really would have an impact on the wider market. For now, we still have the issue sometimes that our reports are not considered by the enough sufficiently by the wider audience. I don't think that the financial market would react to something like that. But of course, yes, it would be helpful if the SEF were able to make a clear statement on where we stand with the progress towards the 100 billion with a clear message. But parties may wish to do that at this COP if they do. And then the geographic distribution of finance, maybe Vicky can say a bit more about that as well. I can just say that we integrated as much geographic distribution as we could in the 100 billion reports. The problem was that many of the underlying information reports did not provide sufficient geographic distribution, and that's why we couldn't provide it in a more aggregate format. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabi. I don't know if you, Vicky, you want? Okay. So then I will pass the floor to Diane and then to Kevin.
I think somebody asked about streamlining reporting. That would be great. And I think many of us would love that. Definitely Vicky would love that for sure. I'll say that on her behalf. With respect to the idea of the 100 billion and whether or not we meet the target, the Bienneial Assessment, I think from the Standing Committee on Finance, because we're limited by data, it's not very clear. And I guess because we're the UNFCCC, we try to be a little bit more conservative. And but what the BA is showing from the first to this BA is that there's a definite trend increase in the financing, increase in access in the financing, and increased number of grants that is being provided, whether or not it's grant equivalent or whatever it is. Definitely there's increased financing in terms of policy going into the private sector. So how all of that add up, there is, as you can see, there is a difference of opinion, but I think basically from a small and developing states and for Vicky and I, it's really tough, and our consultant was here, but she's gone. It's really tough to get the actual data. So I think we are on the side of conservative reporting rather than saying something that is not there. So I think, yeah, from our side, that is what we think.
Kevin, we do not have so much time, but please.
Great. Yeah, a good reminder to keep my answer short. Every time I say that, I talk for twice as long as I would have otherwise. Yeah, options to streamline reporting, I think, was also in reference to the needs assessments as well, specifically. I think my view on this is that there just aren't really best practices right now. Like we need more information on the methods that countries are using. We need to start comparing them. We need to understand what the key methodological decisions countries are making in. Does that vary across contexts or across sectors, across regions? Why? What makes sense? Like we really just need somebody to do some research on this, honestly, to say like, well, of these approaches, what makes sense, what's best practice, and then you need some sort of an implementation program to go out there and help countries do this thing, to install that long-term capacity in the government. One thing that is probably starting to help with this, and I really say starting, is that under the biennial transparency report process, developing countries are encouraged to report on their needs as part of their financial reporting. I think many are experiencing now that they don't have this information very clearly, and that the reporting is a bit of a mess. The US, from the BTR perspective, always says like this is a learning experience for all of us. Everybody's first BTR is going to be a little bit bad, and we're going to learn on all of these new issues and new topics as we go forward. I know our reporting on mobilization is not going to be perfect this first time around, and I expect a lot of countries who report on finance needed are going to do at best a mediocre job this first time around. And if we continue to get better in future BTR reporting cycles based on tools like that, it'd be really helpful, I think. Thanks.
Very quickly on the issue at the back about the number of studies. My country have a project for EV mobility as a Jeff project, and the Jeff was basically saying 50% of the $3 million must be in studies. What do you need them on that? I know that is not a policy. I don't know where it comes from because I've been part of this process, and we push back, and this is where we are. Too much money that is going into the financial mechanism of the convention is being used for studies that the countries don't need. So I do agree with that, and that is something that we all need to pay attention to. Yeah.
Well, to close the meeting, I would like, first of all, to inform you that all slides, reports, and also these presentations are available will be available on the website, SCF website. The reports are already online. And on behalf of the SCF, I would like to thank you for your participation, and we look forward to continuing collaboration with experts, stakeholders, and parties on the SCF work. Thank you so much.